Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Lieutenant General Tim Haugh for joining us today. General Haugh wears multiple hats. He's the commander of 16th Air Force, Air Force's Cyber and Joint Force Headquarters Cyber at Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland, Texas. That 16th Air Force was created last year as a single headquarters responsible for global intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, cyber, electronic warfare, and information operations. Tim's responsible for more than 44,000 people who deliver multi-source ISR products. He supports combatant commanders and executes offensive cyber operations. He's also the Air Force and now the U.S. Space Force's lead for matters involving the conduct of cryptologic activities. Tim has a deep background in cyber operations and information warfare, having previously served as Director of Intelligence at U.S. Cyber Command and as Commander of the Cyber National Mission Force. As General Goldfein has said, there's really no one better to lead the 16th Air Force, which is the tip of the spear for cognitive warfare. With that, Tim, I'd like to turn it over to you to summarize some of the 16th Air Force's top priorities and issues. So you got it.
Awesome. Thank you, General Deptula. I'm excited to be here. Tell the story of 16th Air Force and the 16th Air Force Airmen. The Phoenix of 16th Air Force have definitely risen up in terms of accepting the challenge of what the SecAF, the Chief, and COMAC have asked us to do. And when we stood up in October as a new organization, and really starting to set an ethos of be able to producing outcomes in the information environment, we were given a problem statement. The problem statement was the idea that from a service perspective, we had separation between cyber, ISR, electronic warfare, and information operations into multiple organizations and multiple stovepipes. And the challenge was, how do we integrate those capabilities to produce information warfare outcomes? In doing so, the Secretary assigned a series of missions to 16th Air Force. You highlighted many of those. I'll run through those quickly because it's pretty foundational then to the operational concepts that we're building on, which the roles and responsibilities. And if you think about these various roles, one of the key things that are nested inside of how we are standing up 16th Air Force and the roles and missions, it's tied around a couple of key thoughts. What problems are we focused on? What data do we have access to that is unique from our organization's perspective? And what authorities do we have? And how do we bring those to bear in an integrated manner so that we can converge on targets, both in the kinetic space as well as in the information environment competition? So the roles and missions as assigned by the Secretary: first, the service cryptologic component of both the United States Air Force, the United States Space Force. So in this, we are a component to the National Security Agency and also responsible for the conduct of cryptologic operations within our service and within the Space Force. I was also designated a Defense Intelligence Component Head, which really is the idea that for all of the intelligence activities, ensuring we're doing those in compliance with all of our laws, our values, and policies within the department. So the SIGINT authorities and policies established within the service cryptologic component under John Oxoni for all other intelligence matters within our defense intelligence component role. As a component numbered Air Force, we perform many of the functions as you would expect for any air component in terms of our ability to present ready forces, whether that be our ISR aircraft or our airmen that are conducting ISR operations, but then also serving as the commander of Air Force's cyber, as the component and as the air component to U.S. Cyber Command. The other roles that were established was the Air Force Information Network Ops Commander, which is to run our Air Force's networks. In doing so, we also consolidated under 16th Air Force and under one of our wings the ability to operate, defend, and secure the NIPRNet, SIPRNet, JWICS, and we've begun to receive also some of the SAP networks so that we can manage those under one organization and begin to integrate and share our lessons learned, and as we think about data and many of the things that we're talking about in our cognitive warfare. In the purple role as a component to U.S. Cyber Command, As Air Force's cyber, we are also the Joint Force Headquarters Cyber Air Force. And that provides us to be a component, COCOM to U.S. Cyber Command, but also in general support of 4 other combatant commands. So European Command, Transportation Command, Strategic Command, and now U.S. Spacecom. So as an organization, we have really close ties to 5 combatant commanders on a daily basis in our cyber roles. We are tied to every air component and every combatant commander as an ISR and targeting enterprise and with our weather activities that go on. And we're providing the networks to all airmen that we're operating on and really building the foundations for JADC2. So those are the missions that we're assigned, but there are other critical activities that we do for the Air Force. And those are things that COMAC has really highlighted to ensure that we keep our eye, that we are providing a set of services to every air component, whether that be our global targeting enterprise through the 363rd ISR wing that is doing both targeting as well as leading our analytic efforts, our globally integrated ISR, which is our forward presence that we're providing both from our high altitude resources as well as the distributed common ground system that is producing intelligence based off of a problem-centric approach derived from our ISR and our other unique data sources. Also, the ability to provide warfighter communications through either our networks that are run from the 688 cyberspace wing, but also deployable combat comm and being able to extend our networks. And we'll see that as an increasing important part of agile combat employment, which is how we are able to enable forward communications in an environment that we may need to be agile and need to be moving throughout a particular AOR. The other area, there was a decision made after our stand-up to integrate the 557th Weather Wing into 16th Air Force. So we crossed our 10 wings. We added the 557th, and that has been a brilliant add to our organization. They're an organization that every day does assessments that drives operations. They have big data platforms that they are doing analytic work. They run their own high-performance computing center, and they've also really been a forward-leaning element to realize the idea of a software factory inside their organization. So that we found natural connections with the 557th across our enterprise and now see them as a critical partner as a series of operators. They're going to also be a major contributor to our operational planning as we think about what it looks like to give any advantage we can to an air component in conflict, but also for us to understand some of the information environment. So those are our roles and missions. And in many respects, as you look at the National Defense Strategy, I'm sure I'm the first speaker that has talked at all about the National Defense Strategy as part of these forums. But there are a couple really foundational thoughts that did inform much of our operational thinking. And inside of the National Defense Strategy, it talks about the conflict continuum between competition to conflict. We are really that force that the Air Force has created to move us into the competition space and to be a part of everything that is going on today and joining that competition with our adversaries. Because they had already been there. They have certainly already been taking actions within the information environment, whether it be intellectual property theft, whether it be targeting of our electoral process, whether it being proxy forces that were surrogates for the Russian military. They were already in that space. We've now joined that space in a much more aggressive way in terms of how we've organized 16th Air Force. So that competition space is really the area that I will bring back in many of our conversations, because we have to be able to produce capability across the entire conflict continuum. But the Air Force is really looking at us right now. How do we compete in the information environment? 16th Air Force, how do you bring together, focus on a problem across our 10 wings to bring our unique data, our unique authorities, and be able to be a partner with air components, combatant commands, and the interagency to produce outcomes. So as we did that, we started with 3 lines of effort. The first line of effort was generating insights. Foundation of all warfare is to be able to understand your adversary. 16th Air Force as a unique organization in terms of our intelligence roles, our ability to gain insights and access to unique data, either through partners or through our own operations, really puts us in an incredible spot to generate insights, to understand what our adversaries are doing, and also vulnerabilities that they may have in the competition phase or transition to conflict. So that's our foundational start point. The second component was being prepared to compete now, setting expectations across our force that outcomes are not only encouraged, they're expected. That we have to be able to be informing outcomes today. And I've got some examples we can walk through how we've done that as we go forward. But it's about competing now to be able to contest our adversaries that are taking advantage of what it looks like today in a global environment that is increasingly as disorder as part of one of the foundational ingredients. The last component is we have to be prepared to escalate. As a warfighting organization, we certainly have tasks that have been assigned to all of our units, our 178 squadrons that are focused on that entire conflict continuum. While we're emphasizing competition, our nation expects us to be able to bring every resource we have to bear on a problem if we escalate to conflict. Our goal is to be able to present a series of options that would also allow combatant commanders and our interagency to be able to manage escalation. And I think we are starting to see some of those things emerge. Our foundational operational construct that we're building off of is an idea of convergence. So when Q Highnote spoke, he talked about the Army's definition of convergence, which is the idea that you can use data from any sensor connected to any C2 node to get to any shooter to be able to enable an outcome largely in the kinetic environment. And those are things we've got to be able to do, and it's going to be core to what we do in JADC2, to be able to move that data. When you start to think about convergence in the information environment, it becomes increasingly complex. Global information environment, adversaries that are creating, in many ways, their observation points are not from fixed locations inside an adversary's country. In many cases, that's in creating IT infrastructure that might be in an ally's IT commercial infrastructure. It might be in the United States. As you start to think about that information environment, who do we have to partner with to ensure that we're doing things that are consistent with our laws, policies, and values, what our role is in relation to the interagency, and how we look at which problems are appropriate for us to solve. So we started, as we look at convergence in the information environment, first being problem-centric. How do we get away from being focused on a sensor and now be focused on the data that helps inform a problem? And those, we have seen the lead for that within our ISR enterprise, both within our distributed common ground system, within the 480th ISR wing, shifting to problem-centric approach, really focused on air components, highest priority problems. And then now our targeting enterprise also moving to a target or a problem-centric approach that isn't, let's think about a campaign plan. Let's think about the problems that need to be addressed today by air components and combatant commanders. Some of those will be solved by 16th Air Force in our own combatant command roles, but in others, we're really trying to enable that problem-centric understanding. With that, we want to take advantage of our global access. We are a global organization, both from an ISR enterprise, from cyber, our weather. We are global. How do we leverage that and not get brought back into any biases that we have built up over time that are really geographically based? And in many respects, our 20 years of conflict within the CT environment was all about deriving a spot on the ground or finding an individual. And that became a foundational start point for everything we did after that. There is no real equivalent in the information environment for that geographic start point. So how do we organize ourselves around problems that also doesn't constrain us by the geography? And because in many cases, that information that's available to us will not necessarily be co-located with the adversary we're targeting. And those are some foundational things that we have to ensure within our force, that we aren't taking the bias of the past or a bias that focuses on phase 3 of conflict. It's about how do we compete now. And so as we look at that, it's taking advantage of our global access to data, and unique authorities, whether that's intelligence authorities or the role that we play as a cyber component, or the capabilities that we've now stood up from an information warfare and an IO perspective. How those come together and integrate are the outcomes that we are producing and will produce with our partners. Because in each one of those cases, you start to identify who's the right partner. In some days, it might be the Department of State. Another day, it's a combatant commander. Another day, it's an air component. Another day, it's DHS or FBI. And in some days, it's all of them. And that's a very unique set of roles that we get to play by being connected to the IC, connected to 5 combatant commanders, and also being a warfighting component with clear roles and responsibilities. And that's the area for us that we think will be the secret sauce of 16th Air Force, is how we integrate those functions together while enabling outcomes from our partners, but also being able to execute the things that we're responsible for. So from a big picture standpoint, that's how we're approaching it. What we've been assigned to do, the initial lines of effort that we've been organized around, and really be interested in having a conversation not only about any of those concepts, but also the really good hard work that is going on within 16th Air Force to create the networks that are going to be the enabler of what we want to do from JADC2 and ABMS. So with that, sir, I'll turn it back over to you for any questions.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tim, for those insights. That's a really very good and great view of what your vision is. And a matter of fact, as you're talking, I'm thinking, boy, I'm seeing a real good topic here for a Mitchell Institute forum paper by the commander of 16th Air Force, focused on this whole notion of convergence and just what that means. You also mentioned phasing. I think that, and this is a subject for a completely different discussion, but I'll just mention it. This whole notion of how we've thought about phasing in warfare and joint doctrine is really anachronistic. And quite frankly, it's dangerous because it's taken us to places and had us miss opportunities as well as objectives that have already been accomplished. And we go on and we do something rote because, well, the next phase obviously is something that needs to be accomplished. But anyway, let's put that to the side. I want to put that idea into your cranium, and let's jump a little deeper into some of the points that you mentioned. Now, one of your top priorities as the commander of 16th Air Force is to synchronize ISR, electronic warfare, cyber and information ops capabilities. Could you briefly address the progress that's been made toward breaking down the stovepipes that historically have existed between those mission areas?
I guess, yes, I could definitely do that, sir. One thing that has been very interesting is, in many cases, those stovepipes are very intentional. We created those stovepipes in certain situations to ensure our compliance with the law and ensure we're compliance with policy. So we have spent a lot of time with our lawyers to make sure that as we're applying our various roles and responsibilities, that we're integrating the data in a manner that is also consistent with every one of our policies and our oversight. So that's been one of our things that we've really built in from the beginning: compliance and how we approach each of these problems. The area that I think we've started to make them a couple key areas of progress. One is in partnership with Air Combat Command, as our lead MAGCOM, we have now established the structure of the organization. And that foundational component of building an information warfare operational staff that executes all of our component functions. And we've organized that staff really consistent with what a JTF looks like. So we have a J staff that is executing our component functions on a daily basis, executing our component battle rhythm, our connection to our 5 COCOMs, and building an integration. Really, the day we stood up a J39, they had a whole series of partners across the world. Every IO entity in the world understands the role and function of a J39. Our J39, now established, built immediate partnerships with their components and combatant commands, started to build that out. And that's probably one of the foundational things that we focused on. In there, we had to build capacity. So as part of the creation of the new organization, we did take resources from the 2 predecessor numbered air forces, and we repurposed some of those resources to now grow information warfare planning capacity. That was a clear go-to from COMAC: build planning capacity and align it with the NDS. We built one element that is our information warfare cell capacity that we built into our component that we will present to U.S. Cyber Command so we can integrate cyber and our IO planning, which we're already doing. The second area was to grow an information warfare cell that is tied very closely with USAF and EUCOM, as well as one that is closely tied with PACAF and INDOPACOM. clearly linking to the priorities in the national defense strategy. So those, we now have billets assigned to those additional information warfare cells, but we've not yet hired all the people into them. We've stood up our first one as really our foundational component to get after those initial problems. So getting our staff right. The other element was aligning what role 16th Air Force plays in relation to all the roles and missions with Air Combat Command. So Air Combat Command has taken on all of the organize, train, and equip things that we need them to do across all our roles and missions, where we're focused on warfighting. And that's what really, in the original document that SecAF and the chiefs signed out to ACC and 16th Air Force, it was to be the information warfare tactics lead and the operator that brings the operational art into this competitive environment. So we have really focused on that and allowed Air Combat Command to now fight budget battles and those things for what do we need for equipping. And General Holmes and General Wegeman and their team have really accepted that role as we've gone forward. So I think that is going incredibly well. The other integration is more subtle, which is how do we bring forums together where all of our wings that are focused on a problem can be in the same room, and we start to build out what things are they all contributing. And then taking it to the next layer, so all the weapons and tactics teams are talking. But that simple act of creating a forum, which was built largely on our component responsibilities. We had very good component forums in our B2, C2WG for how do we support and produce cyber outcomes. We've expanded that forum into an information warfare environment. And I took an update yesterday that was just exactly what we were hoping to see, which was information and data being passed between elements that traditionally had been in stovepipes that were now mutually supportive of each organization. So an example would be, for me, a metric at the tactical level is if we discover something in our ISR enterprise, that an element of our ISR enterprise, it could be an analysis and exploitation team that's in support of Air Forces Africa. And if they're tracking something that Air Forces Africa requested, like a Russian private military corporation doing malign activities in the AFRICOM AOR, if there's a fact that they can pass to our cyber enterprise that allows them to pursue an adversary, that's a data point that I'm consciously watching and tracking. And then can that cyber entity, if they're successful in their operations, does data flow back to that element in the ISR enterprise so they produce a better intelligence product for the air component? And this is where, for us, that art is starting to come together. Right now, it's very manual, and we're seeing the processes and the data flows start to fall in place, that will become a more automated and routine function that now becomes mutually supportive across our enterprise. So those were just a couple touch points. The other key thing that was a big milestone for 16th Air Force, on Monday, COMAC declared us fully operational capable as an organization. So we are now FOC. We've met his requirements. There's still some paperwork to do in terms of getting the UMDs final and all those things, but the structure's in place, our process is in place, and we're executing.
Well, that's great. Congratulations, Tim. It sounds like a good way, a good model to organize after in the context of sort of the command relationships between what are the responsibilities of ACC and then likewise 16th Air Force. And doing it along the lines of a joint task force makes eminent sense. Let's kind of move to a related but different area, one a little bit more pragmatic, and without getting too esoteric, could you explain how China and Russia view information warfare and how their approaches may be different or similar to what the Department of Defense's? For example, isn't targeting the ability of an enemy's leadership to make decisions at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels a key element of China's warfighting strategy?
It is, and I think this is really germane to how we're thinking about these problems. And as you talked about conflict and phasing earlier, this is a really good example. In many ways, we have trained ourselves as a service at every red flag we've gone to that conflict begins when two fighters engage. or we find a target in the battle space. And so we've really trained ourselves that conflict begins at that moment. And you'll see it in every conversation that we have. What do we think our adversaries view that as? Was the first element of really when we got into conflict in the information environment in what we're dealing with today, was it the first day that one of our companies was hacked, that the intellectual property theft of one of our weapons systems was stolen? Was that really when conflict began? Was it the day that Russian hackers hacked into the DNC? Was that really the day that conflict began for our nation, and how we should be thinking about it when the adversaries went to another level of using some level of malign activity that is outside of things that we would consider norms? And for us, where we see that today routinely is Russia really does a disinformation tactic which floods the zone. There is no topic that they cannot add additional layers of lies on top of. And if anybody wants to dive deeper into that, looking at the history of their narratives associated with the MH17 incident and the shoot down of that airliner, you will see a series of things where they have thrown out 6 or 7 concepts of defense to see which one of them would be the most aligned would get any resonance in the information environment. And that's very representative. And it starts with their foreign ministry and some of their statements, and is amplified both publicly through the government and through clandestine means. And that's been well documented in terms of the role of the Internet Research Agency, and that has been very exposed as to what their tradecraft look like. China's a much more nuanced actor that uses all its levers of national power, whether that's economic coercion, whether it's overt lobbying, to then things that now more closely mimic Russia's tactics. The other big area that China stands out, and I've heard a number of times the Deputy Attorney General talk about this, which is China as the actor that is hacking into networks to gain economic advantage. They're really the one nation in the world that has made that into an industry as they have gone forward, of stealing intellectual property, monetizing it, and enabling from a national strategy. So they have taken on a very, what it has been a nuanced approach, but they have now, as we've seen in COVID, and it's been pretty well demonstrated by the Department of State, that they have also gone to an environment of putting out disinformation at pretty large scale. So we know that's going to be the way our adversaries compete. For us, as a Department of Defense and the role that 16th Air Force plays, our foundation has to be truth. And we should be trying to get truth into the environment everywhere we can and be able to publicly disclose what those adversaries are doing. And that means allowing our public affairs teams to be operationalized and do the missions that are assigned in the DoDI, and allowing them to combat disinformation is one of the stated missions of public affairs. And we have to create an environment, and what we're advocating for would be, we tend to over-coordinate our releases across the department, and of a concern of never putting something out, and that really isn't the way to compete at speed and velocity. And that in the future, what you would expect us to get to is an environment where we're given constraints that would largely be policy constraints, which are, these would be things that would be more appropriate that the state lead our message, that Department of State leads our messaging efforts. But Department of Defense, anywhere within these right and left boundaries, everybody communicate. And if we tend to run our messages over, the information environment will roll over that the next day. It's a very low risk environment to put more truth into the environment. And if we start there, knowing what our right and left bumpers are, and we're going to do truth is what we're putting out, we should be able to do that at velocity. And you're seeing bits and pieces of this today. Today is another day where AFRICOM this morning put out another public affairs release of activities that Wagner is doing in Africa that go beyond the pale in terms of they're no longer a security company. They're a surrogate of the Russian military and how they're acting with fighters. Today it was landmines. But putting that out and showing that malign activity with commercial imagery, with pictures, with narrative, We should be doing that daily. We've seen General Raymond also take those steps in talking about the space domain. We want to continue to accelerate that within the roles and with all of our partnerships.
Yeah, well, it's as you're talking, I'm thinking of many war stories, from Operation Enduring Freedom days, from Northern Watch days, where our adversaries just did heinous things. And for whatever reason, there was a reticence inside the Department of Defense to release what it was that they were doing. I mean, exactly what you're saying, using truth as a means to counter the malign activities of our adversaries is something that has to be fundamental to our national security apparatus. I mean, it's very interesting to take a look and realize that we have a cabinet level agency for defense, for diplomacy, for economics. But what's that fourth pillar of our national security enterprise that we don't have a cabinet level agency for? That's information. That's a whole nother discussion area. But let me ask you and get into a related area. For 45 years, Tim, Intel had a major command in the Air Force from 1948 to 1993. Then we went through a period of 14 years as an Intel agency. And in 2007, yours truly tried to set up an ISR major command, but had to settle for an ISR agency. With the fundamental roles that ISR, cyber, electronic warfare, and information that you just described are playing in warfare today, isn't it time to at least start planning for the transformation of 16th Air Force into a major command under the rubric of information warfare?
I think it really comes back to, John Deptula, what I also described to you is a really complex operational organization, right? We've been given a pretty clear mandate in terms of how do we bring all of these things together? And that has enabled us. Being operationally focused has really allowed me as an organization to be focused on who are my operational partners. Because there is not a day that goes by that we couldn't be talking to someone, whether a foreign partner, an element of the interagency, an element of the IC, an air component, or a combatant command, that we don't have an operational partnership with that we could be expanding. And that's what General Holmes has asked me to focus on. And thankfully, I am not distracted by what's happening in the Pentagon from a budget standpoint. That has been, General Holmes has taken that with his team, and we're using all of their processes to be able to really leverage his role of how do we construct the right blend of forces with AFWIC. He's taken that on. I don't get distracted by that at all. They asked me for operational vignettes, and they've taken that ball and they've been our champion. That's powerful for us. That means we're focused on war fighting and doing those things that we need to do. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. The only flip side right now is we have to educate the whole Air Force as to the conversations that we have as a NAF. And meaning that everybody has their own biases as to what a NAF does. Normally a component NAF is not tied to 5 COCOMs and is also not tied to an intelligence agency. So we have a series of relationships that are different. And that is the area that, as an operational warfighting organization, we have to determine what that looks like and how we talk about it. But I'm thankful right now that we don't have to worry about POM. We're not worried about the acquisition requirements in that relationship, and it's working extremely well. That is, and I'll give you one quick example. The work that we're doing right now on the network, allowing ACCA 6 to chart the course with COMAC's guidance as to what he's looking for from user experience, how we defend our data, and how we transition from a perimeter defense to a data defense. ACC is leading that. But we have unity of effort, really, with LCMC. Major General Schmidt and his role in HN, they have done a phenomenal job building out the Air Force's cloud architecture in Cloud One. We're seeing the benefits of the work that they've done with both Dr. Roper and Mr. Shalane on our software factories inside of Platform One. Those are enablers for us that all I have to do is be an operational customer and demander of capability, and they're delivering. And as we go forward with our zero trust approach to transition to a zero trust architecture, that's being led by ACC, and our job is to really bring in the operational expertise to do it. It's working extremely well. The partnership between ACC, LCMC, our SAF CIO, has been a huge enabler for I think accelerating where the Air Force wants us to go.
Yeah, I know it sounds, Tim, like things are working very, very well, particularly with the stand-up of 16th, the establishment of the roles and responsibilities that you laid out earlier, bringing all of these disparate elements together. Magnificent stuff. I just ask that you start thinking about as you move and become more senior. Don't forget that who makes the resource decisions also has an enormous control over what happens, and that Air Combat Command has many, many other areas to consider in terms of resource allocation. So that's something that you might want to stick in the back of your cranium as information becomes more and more important as part of a conflict in the future. So as a follow-up, let me ask you this, because you've been part of U.S. Cyber Command before. Do you think that there may be advantages to U.S. Cyber Command eventually broadening its scope and becoming an information warfare combatant command?
I would say the first thing we want to do is we want to be enabling every combatant commander to be doing increasing number of operations in the information environment. That there are going to be inherent strengths and linkages between Cyber Command, its relationship and partnership with the National Security Agency, and the ability to compete in the information environment. There's clearly some things we're already taking advantage of today in terms of how we think about precision information operations, and leveraging our ability to gain some unique insights into what are some potential adversary vulnerabilities. That has to be a part of everything that we do. That is really integral to competition as we go forward. But what first we should be doing is really accelerating the competition in the information environment, making our adversaries respond every day. And that first starts with every commander engaging in the information environment in a really aggressive way, and looking at the scope and scale of what our adversaries are doing versus what we're doing, and really starting to balance that scale in terms of every day competing and being able to put truth out at very low levels. We should be able to do that on a very routine basis. And I think we have a lot to bring, given the investment the Air Force has made in our ISR enterprise, and an ISR enterprise that right now is really configured and optimized for the competition environment.
I was going to say, as you're talking there, it's a very pragmatic approach that you're taking. What you're saying is, hey, let's get information, and this whole notion of truth and how we operate and countering what the adversary is doing across the board in every organization. So make the operations realistic, and then let the organizational structure follow where it goes. Don't try to impose an organizational structure and then begin to do operations. Kind of let's operate, recognizing this new environment that we're in, and then we'll let the organizations evolve as they may. Is that a fair characterization of your approach?
I think that is, because the other thing, I'll give you just a very different example, but I think it is related, where the way we thought about these things in the past, it was both in how we approached information and how we approach partnerships with foreign partners was very geographically based.
Yeah.
And in reality, now we're seeing both of those evolve. And we've been assigned as a component to U.S. Cyber Command to lead a series of foreign partnerships. So we have established, as part of our FOC structure, a foreign partnership division. We have a POLAD, and we're building partnerships side by side with the geographic combatant commander, but we're coming as partners to talk about offensive and defensive cyber. And then how do we partner together if we're working on a common problem? Very different approach than we would have thought of in the past, which would have all been through a geographic combatant commander for a very specific purpose. those purposes are now starting to broaden. Likewise, if you want to build a partnership in space and you're a nation, you would want to have a clear partnership with General Raymond, even though his domain is global. That's not where we would have been in the past in terms of a geographic bias to start those discussions. And you want them to be involved because they can clearly leverage that partnership as well. But that's the same thing in the information environment. We just have to be taking away some of the past things that we viewed as things we couldn't cross, to now being able to, almost on a daily basis, we should be thinking about how does supported and supporting shift throughout the day. And there are going to be times where we're providing information to a geographic combatant commander so they can release it in the environment. And there are going to be other days where we should be taking lead because of the topic, and we should be pushing that data into the information environment. And we should be informing each other, but we shouldn't have to go through everybody's B2, C2, WG to get there.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent example. Hey, Tim, here's one that has been the topic of a conversation in the arena, and that's that the convergence of electronic warfare and cyber is a pretty significant endeavor. I mean, both share the same spectrum, yet we quickly get into rice bowl arguments as soon as we try to find common ground. And I think here's where definitions are important and can be helpful. The dictionary definition of the electromagnetic spectrum is, quote, the entire range of wavelengths or frequencies of electromagnetic radiation extending from gamma rays to the longest radio waves and including visible light, unquote. And then the DoD definition of cyberspace is, quote, a domain characterized by the use of electronics and electromagnetic spectrum to store, modify, and exchange data via network systems and associated physical infrastructures, unquote. So here's the question. If cyberspace involves the use of the electromagnetic spectrum, does that not imply that the electromagnetic spectrum is actually the domain of which cyberspace is a subset, an environment therein, and that therefore cyber operations are actually a form of electronic warfare and a mission area inside the domain of the electromagnetic spectrum?
Yeah, so I will admittedly say I have not spent a lot of time thinking through those definitions. The area that we've been more focused on right now is how do we enable operations in the EMS in many of our roles. So there's a couple of things that we're doing right now. I'll just give you a little bit of background as I dodge that question, hopefully successfully. Is that one, we just hired Brigadier General Dave Gedicka to be the Vice Commander of 16th Air Force. So he led the Air Force's year-long study into operations in the EMS. Right. We're also expecting him to bring every bit of that knowledge as to how we think about integration of electronic warfare and operations in the EMS across all of our roles and missions. And one of those that is really clearly tied, and where we're spending a lot of time with Air Combat Command, is in our role as an ISR enterprise and lead for SIGINT, we need to generate the tech SIGINT necessary to be able to enable operations that are in the EMS. We have to be able to understand and characterize adversary technical capabilities in a way that is really rapidly made available to every MDS that will be in the environment. And so that's one area that we're spending a lot of time in our SIGINT role, which is partnering with each of the other services and NSA to grow those capabilities, to be able to characterize what's happening in the electromagnetic spectrum. And then partnering with Air Combat Command to stand up a spectrum warfare wing, in that as we grow and be able to do rapid reprogramming, we're going to stand that wing up under the Air Warfare Center to be able to, for us to be able to bring data to them so that they can turn that process instantaneously to get it back out to every MDS across the Joint Force. So that's the area we're starting with. How do we take what we already have and optimize it with our partnerships inside of Air Combat Command, while building relationships between where we're going and the investments that we're making in platforms, our partnership with the National Security Agency, our partnership across the Joint Force, to really understand what we're investing in. And then inside there, I think we're also working Where we need to be really aggressive as 16th Air Force is demanding capabilities that cut across all these roles and missions. That traditionally how we operate in our acquisition programs is through a program element that's very defined. And in essence, that goes against everything we're being asked to do to integrate those functions. And so that's an area we're working with the ACC staff, which is how do we integrate across those? From a spectrum and a domain standpoint, I don't think right now there's much appetite to have the discussion because of really what will occur following it. That we'll want to have a discussion of ownership, we'll want to have a discussion of budgets. And right now we need to grow capacity across all these capabilities across all the services.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what your previous answer, or not answer, but your description was, which I think is extraordinarily pragmatic. And that is, look, we've got these challenges ahead. Let's tackle them. We'll allow organization to follow, which is an excellent, I think personally, an excellent way to go. But recognizing that there are these other issues out there. Let me, I didn't even mean to cut you off, but I'm in the interest of time trying to get some of our audience questions. Let me ask you one more to kind of wrap up sort of what you've been talking about. You talked about integration inside the Air Force. Do you think that the Department of Defense and the other services should do more to integrate their information warfare capabilities? And clearly, 16th Air Force is leading the way in terms of integration inside the U.S. Air Force. How are you meshing with the other service and organizational efforts in the information domain?
It's a great question, and I'm really excited because really when you look across the service cyber components and our partners that we have every day in every forum, we have really collegial partners. And one of the thought leaders in this space is Lieutenant General Steve Fogarty. And so I've spent a lot of time with Steve personally, and also leveraging what the Army has thought about from an information warfare perspective to help inform a lot of what we've done in 16th Air Force. And then vice versa, we think our concepts of convergence are also helping inform how the other services are thinking about it. And this is where individual service strengths really do start to come into play. And you see one of our positive biases that I would say as airmen is we really think about the operational level of a war. And it's not a leap for us to then think strategically from that. And that's where we've ingrained almost everything about how we focus information, how we focus capabilities, where we integrate them has largely been at the operational level. The Army has started really at the tactical level and building up. The Navy has many of the same components across their information warfare enterprise, but they've focused it on the fleet. And each of those brings a different perspective as to how we're integrating the capabilities. We've probably gone the farthest to try to integrate at the data level to enable each of the missions, but we see each of the other services that are also thinking their way through it. The Marines have also been very a great partner as they're thinking about ops in the information environment, and as they do everything from a very smaller footprint. In many cases, they can be agile in their operational concepts. And so we've spent a lot of time with them on how they're using publicly available information and how they're thinking about enabling the future from a Marine operational, what would have been within the MAGTF, now starting to think from a broader perspective of where information plays across all their roles and missions. So those conversations have been really collegial. They've been helpful. And we've spent a lot of time with General Fogarty and his team as they've started to transition from being Army cyber to then growing into an information warfare command. And I think we're all coming at this slightly differently, but it's been a really powerful set of discussions that have allowed us to think who needs to be talking on a daily basis as we work globally on a number of these challenges.
Well, thanks for that, Tim. We've come to the end of this portion of our discussion, and I'm thinking back to General Coldfean's remarks, and you truly are the right person in the right place in the right time, and in my humble opinion, really have your act together in terms of bringing together all of these various organizations and the 10 wings that you have. It's a stroke of brilliance to bring weather into this. I mean, when people think about the amount of data that goes into weather predictions nowadays, it's a perfect fit. So congratulations and all the best to you and your command's success. So we're now going to transition to our listeners and do a Q&A from the audience. As a reminder, please, when I call on your name, use a raise function, feature. I'll call on you. Please state your name and your organization. So let's get started right away. First question from Tobias Nagel.
Hi, General. Thank you for doing this. The word or phrase that hasn't come up today that surprised me a little bit is JADC2, which is kind of ubiquitous in everything the Air Force and really the Joint Force is talking about these days. And I wanted to kind of get your sense of what work has to be done to fully be able to trust the data that is being shared at speed and to ensure no one else has it. And then as a sort of a follow, what are you doing in terms of looking at trying to identify bugs in systems that need to be fixed so that we can trust that data?
So Tobias, thank you for the question, because I was holding it for this session, as this portion is expected to have some discussion. For us, it's incredibly important, and we think we're going to be a really a key part of how the Air Force is able to move out quickly, because underpinning JADC2 is our network, and the work that is going on today for us is enterprise as a service to build out our network. The things that we're doing collaboratively, that the Space Force began doing a lot of the work on data strategy and data inventory, that partnership to build out our understanding of where our data is, who needs access to it, how we need to protect that data, that work is well on its way, and we've got a key role to play in that, because the data strategy component that is being led from SAF and HAF, and then all the MAGCOM supporting, is going to be central to our ability to then be able to do the AI and ML necessary with everything that we're doing. But we're really focused on the risk reduction activities of enterprise as a service to help inform it, because it starts to take our compute and store and moving it to the edge at each of our installations, which will enable many of the concepts of what JADC2 looks at. Our other area is, how do we, as an operational numbered Air Force with all the roles and responsibilities we have, how do we make data available across where we're headed from an ABMS perspective to be able to ensure that that data is with the right unit to be able to execute wherever they are in the conflict continuum, whether that's data that we need to connect dots between publicly available and exquisite classified to be able to enable public disclosure and competition, all the way to we're in conflict and we need to find that adversary critical element, and we got to be able to get that to the right shooter at the right time. That whole spectrum is enabled by the network that we know that we will be running, whether that's at the unclassified or classified levels, as well as being an inject of a lot of the data that's going to be in there. The final area that does overlap with that as well is, we're doing a number of concepts right now that we're integrating with the elements at the Warfare Center, and we are proposing back to be future sprints. Is we have a really good honed enterprise of how we do national to tactical integration of intelligence, but that has largely been from fixed facilities to fixed facilities. What we are now working through are concepts within the 70th Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Wing, which is, what does our NTI Next Gen look like, that now puts that to the network edge, that we're now making that data available, and at whatever bandwidth we're going to be able to fight through. Those are things we've got to be able to work through. So we're excited. We know we've got a big role to play in JADC2, both as a customer of JADC2, as well as an enabler, both of the underlying network, as well as the data that's going to ride on it. So we're excited by the work that Preston's team has done. And we really see how that's going to come together on the vision that Dr. Roper has put out in terms of how we sprint through this in the individual software factories that we're creating across our Air Force with containerized code to be able to rapidly deploy capability. and then also to defend data as it opposed to defending a network edge. We've got a lot of really good concepts that we have already operationalized. Some we've proposed to Cyber Command to execute in relation to Zero Trust. And we're also investing in the mission defense teams that will defend individual weapon systems as we go forward, to make sure that if we have a vulnerability in a legacy MDS, that we're also putting additional resources against defending that. Over.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Sarah Sirota.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. I have a question about artificial intelligence. I was wondering if you can talk about how AI is used in the 16th Air Force today, how you might be training algorithms, training people to use it, how it might be operationalized. You know, AI requires a lot of computing power to really use at scale. So how you see the 16th Air Force needing to make an investment into that to really enable it in a larger scale ahead.
So Sarah, today we are using both artificial intelligence and machine learning in a number of our missions. Those are really within our ISR enterprise, and also within cybersecurity are the first two areas that come to mind that are routine in what we're doing. We clearly partnered with the Jake right out of the gate in terms of Maven, was one exemplar that has continued to advance and really was foundational for us to think through how do we educate the algorithms, how do we really put the right compute and store in the right place, and it informed where we went in our risk reduction activities for enterprise as a service. How do we put compute and store at local levels while also thinking from a hybrid perspective of how we're leveraging the power and the compute and store that's available to us in the cloud. And that collaboration that's occurring between the AQ team, LCMC, ACC, and us, we're seeing those pieces fall into place. The area that we want to continue to advance is how does more data become available to those discussions so that we can cross multiple roles and missions with that data, not just being able to enhance an individual mission as we go forward. That's our real big next step. Over.
Okay, let's go to our next question. Teresa Hitchens.
It's Colin, but never mind.
Oh, Colin. Okay, she come up as Teresa, but whatever.
Yeah. General, I'm been trying to form this question for the last few minutes, and it may come out a bit jumbled. But one of the topics you guys dealt with was lines of command, and whether they're clear enough, whether the authorities are clear enough, the whole issue of, you know, how much is EMS cyber, you know, on and on and on and on. I guess the question really boils down to, do your bosses have clear enough lines of command to effectively tell you what they need? Or do you have to often guess what they need?
So I think we've got very clear lines of command. Now, I'll break it down a little bit deeper than that. We are absolutely clear under what authority we acquire data, because I think that is the area that we set out right at the outset, that I gave as very clear guidance to our team, is that we will never compromise in terms of ensuring that we are acquiring data and processing and handling data in compliance with whomever has authorized us to receive it. Because that's really a trust and partnership, both with our laws and policies, but also our values and our trust relationship with that partner. So that's first. We have very clear authorities on data. In terms of the roles and missions that we execute, it is really complementary of the things that we know through orders what our responsibilities are in terms of the things that we're responsible to lead, and then the things that we are in support of in other roles and missions. So those are really clear, and we know exactly what those things are. What we're trying to do is make all the data available on those same problems, regardless of whether it's something we've been directed to do or if it's something we're in support of another organization, enabling that organization to also be able to do planning with that data, whether it's a product we produce or the raw data itself. That's the art that we're really trying to think through, is how do we have a data strategy, access to data, access to algorithms that makes that now more impactful from both the speed and velocity perspective. But from an authority standpoint, very clear. From an intent from any of my various bosses, very clear. And I think we've translated the same in orders to our subordinate organizations. Over.
Could you give us an example, a generic example? Because it's, I understand the words, but it's hard to actually focus all of that.
Probably one really unique one. One of the priorities that the Secretary of Defense has given to General Noxoni is defense of elections. That clearly would not have been a mission that we would have thought of in under a previous national defense strategy. That would not have been a role and mission you would have thought of the Department of Defense. That given to General Noxoni, he's organized the team that is a partnered activity between NSA and Cyber Command that is in support of Homeland Security and the FBI. So now in that case, very unique set of roles and responsibilities. As a component to U.S. Cyber Command, I've been given very clear roles and missions that are in support of the 2020 elections. With that, our cyber units have been given some responsibilities, whether that be to be able to do specific defensive actions or to understand adversary activities, as well as within our ISR enterprise, we have leveraged them to also be able to look what's occurring in the information environment and to develop public disclosure packages to be able to disclose malign activity through any of those mission partners. So that's just one example of a mission that's pretty unique. It's different than things we would have done in the past in the Department of Defense. And under various roles and authorities, we're contributing to the defense of 2020 elections in support of multiple organizations simultaneously.
Thank you.
Hey, Tim, we've come to the end of our hour, but we've got about 4 more questions. Do you have a couple minutes to answer these folks' questions?
I do.
Great. Okay, let's go with Frank Wolf.
Hi, I appreciate it. Just in terms of, you've spoken a good deal about this already, but just in terms of future of cyber warfare and in terms of artificial intelligence, giving adversaries capabilities to sort of break into networks that we have more quickly, and some of the capabilities that blockchain may afford in terms of defense, just in terms of what 16th Air Force is thinking about in terms of the future of cyber warfare and what your ongoing activities are, and whether you think, in fact, the Talon manual might need some revision so that you could undertake other kinds of activities.
So we think from our standpoint today, from a defensive perspective, we want to rapidly transition from network edge defense to data defense. And that is central to many of the things that General Holmes has pushed us in terms of expecting us to go at zero trust. And that changes a number of things. It changes our architecture, it changes how we approach it, it changes how we train airmen, and also which things we can automate and which things we need to still defend with a human to be able to translate that. That's our first thing that we really have to be able to move towards. In terms of overall authorities and expectations, there's really good alignment today between Congress, and the entire executive branch in terms of how we are approaching cyberspace, both from enabling law enforcement, enabling the Homeland Security in terms of its role in critical infrastructure protection. We've now had a much better definition of how we go after intellectual property theft and begin to build those partnerships with the defense industrial base. And then if we are required to act, those things, the NDAAs and the guidance that we've received have now are much more coherent and timely in how we will approach that. So I think we're in a pretty good place today from being able to take the actions whatever actions that our leadership asks us to do. Over.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark Parmalu.
General Haugh, you mentioned at the outset, this notion of competition phase really being at the sort of forefront of why you were created. I'm just curious if you can maybe tease that out a little bit more and provide some clarity as to maybe some of the packages or options that you have now underneath your command that can sort of help the United States sort of meet adversaries at that competition phase and kind of help thwart some of these gray zone operations that seem to be a little bit more pervasive.
Mark, thanks. Well, I think part of it is the alignment that we have with General Noxoni's organizations. And in many respects, he's been tasked to do a lot of this through the DoD cyber strategy. His approach to implement the defend forward construct of the department with persistent engagement. And that really is where, through his strategy of enable others and then act when called upon, that really resonated with me in terms of I've now worked for General Noxoni for the last 4 years, and being able to then take those thoughts and bring them to our Air Force and how we organize a really a pretty sizable portion of our Air Force around some of those thoughts to take advantage of persistent engagement. And for us to be able to realize that through Convergence, that's really why we're here, is to think about that information environment. And we've been working really closely with ACC and with Haugh as to what is the Air Force's operational concept for the information environment across all our roles and missions. And in creating 16th Air Force, we have a number of air components around the globe that are focused on problems that with their alignments geographically with their component commanders. And they're bringing an awful lot every day across both competition and then preparing for conflict. But their core job is not focused on the information environment. Our job is focused on the information environment. And I think that really brings a lot for us to be able to help advance all of the Air Force's thoughts as to how we are organizing ourselves for the joint fight, and by us being that focused element on the competition phase.
All right, let's turn to Jim Keffer.
Hi, good afternoon. How you doing? Quick question for you. So I agree with General Deptula. You've done a heck of a job putting this command together. You've got a lot of spinning plates. You're trying to put all those spinning plates onto one stick. And so question to you is, what is your biggest hurdle, your biggest challenge? Is it people? Is it technology? Is it authorities? Is it organizational? And then kind of a second part to that is, what can this audience do? You know, civilians, military contractors, what can this audience do to try to help you get all those plates on that single stick? Thanks.
Jim, great to hear from you today. I think our biggest one that we're working through culturally today is ensuring that all of our airmen know that they are empowered. It is really a different, and as we've talked about decision advantage over the last few decades, decision advantage was the idea that we could support any commander at any level with the right intelligence to be able to make a decision that produced an outcome for them. And that could have been anywhere from a company commander tactically on a battlefield in Iraq or Afghanistan, all the way to a component commander trying to understand the intent of what an adversary is thinking in terms of their actions. But in doing that, it really deferred the action to that supported commander. And what we're trying to communicate to every one of our airmen is they can be the element that produces the outcome. For example, if we think about what AFRICOM did to be able to track and then disclose the Russian fighters that were handed off from the MOD to Wagner PMC in Libya. That was a series of activities that really were being discovered by senior airmen that were in support of the air component and meeting AFRICOM and EUCOM's intelligence needs. We want every one of those airmen to be able to identify the idea if they have the piece of information that is truth data that should be exposed that would now put pressure on our adversary, we want them to know they can proffer that they can bring that to us, and we have an element within our headquarters in our J39 that could quickly work to do the public disclosure through the appropriate channels. And that's a culture shift that says you're empowered to recognize that you are out there every day understanding what's occurring in that environment. We know you're an expert in your field, and we're going to need you to operate as not only a sensor, but a leader in identifying how we put pressure on our adversary every day at speed and velocity that makes them respond to the truth information and those disclosures as they occur. So that's a cultural shift we're trying to work through. The others are some of the things that are related to the stovepipes we built. that we built some of those stovepipes for a reason. And now we have to make sure that as we break down some of those stovepipes, we do it in a way that's in compliance with all of our governing guidance as we go forward. So that's one we're being very conscientious about building deliberately, but enabling those conversations in an appropriate channel. The thing that you can do, the number one thing all of us can do as American citizens, is when we see disinformation, call it out. And that starts with, every one of our moms, our dads, our uncles that are putting out bad information and allowing it to go further. We see it every day. For every one of you that has a Facebook account, you have a relative today that probably forwarded Russian disinformation to somebody else. And those things, as a society, we have to be able to see truth and be able to make decisions based off truth. And so that's the most immediate thing. We have attempted to do that within our span of control, which is, as 16th Air Force, we view that we have a responsibility to give tools to commanders and to leaders across our service to say, this is what disinformation looks like. Here are ways you can mitigate it. Here's how you do fact checking. Here are things that you can rely upon. And all of us have a responsibility of Americans to do that. The last one is just don't click on any link on any email. Please don't do that. That is we still have the very simple vectors. We are all a vector of disinformation, and whether or not we continue it. And the second one is, from a cybersecurity perspective, still the primary vector is spear phishing. And that has been the area that we've tried to continue to educate our force in ways that they can understand and recognize.
Wow, that's a very powerful answer, Tim. Let me beg you for one more question. This comes from the Netherlands Air Attaché, Colonel Van Gel. And he asked, could you please describe international cooperation of the 16th Air Force? Do you work directly with other air forces or just through the COCOMs?
So it really does depend. Depending on the answer as to which element in the nation that we're partnering with is their lead element. And you'll see this is very different because we've organized as the United States with a lot of resources. We've created organizations that are dedicated to many functions. U.S. Cyber Command really dedicated to offense and defense and running our networks, giving the guidance to defend and secure those networks. In many nations, there's a combination of an intelligence organization with cyber, and in some cases that's led a civilian-led organization. In other cases, it's their Department of Defense. And so we're going to go partner with whomever is the element that's working on the problem that we're trying to solve. And those could be very different. And it might mean our first partner before we work with a foreign nation might be the FBI. It might be the country team. It might be through the Geographic Combatant Command. But it's finding our way to the partner that is sharing the same problem. If we're looking to grow partner capacity, that's a little bit different. And we normally will do that really in partnership with the combatant commander, so that if another nation comes in and is asking for their MOD to grow out cyber capability, we'll work that really closely between Cyber Command and that Geographic Command. And the other element you will also see appear in that are our National Guard forces. The partnerships between many states and various nations are an enabler for us in this discussion as well. And so having the sight picture of our own blue order of battle of where those partnerships exist, we want to build on those. If somebody has been to a country for 10 years consecutively exercising with them, that's probably a great start point for a conversation on another topic. And so we're trying to use those as well. So it really depends on what we're trying to achieve and who's asking us. Our partnerships with NATO look a little different depending on what General Walters is asking us to do as the commander of EUCOM or in his role with NATO as SACEUR. And those where we'll contribute to forums and be the U.S. element in many cases that's trying to bring expertise into some of those forums and some of our lessons learned. We have tried to also share with many nations our lessons learned of building the cyber mission force. As a Department of Defense, the journey we've been on since 2012 to build out the cyber mission force within the services, we've learned a lot of lessons. How to create that force, how to train it, how we equip it, the infrastructure we use and the partnerships we have, we're trying to share those lessons as well, so that if there are things that we wouldn't do again, we don't want another nation to replicate that.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. We've come to the end of this session of Aerospace Nation. And General Haugh, it was a real pleasure to host you today. And Mitchell Institute would like to thank you and all the men and women of 16th Air Force for everything that you all are doing to defend our nation. It is really spectacular to hear your perspectives on how we need to move information and into the forefront of our attention span. So we'll do our best to help you. I hope you'll take me up on my offer to write more about this, to get your perspectives out there into the defense community. And with that, have a great aerospace power kind of day.
Awesome. Thank you, John Deptula. Have a great day.
Have a great day. See you.
Rise up.
You bet.